Horror games are second only to comedy games in being one of the trickiest subject matters for video games to tackle. What you're trying to do is find the perfect line between being so scary that someone feels terror and being not so scary that they feel the need to stop. You're trying to trigger the part of their brain that tells them they need to stop, and yet you're also trying to get them to feel like they need to continue. It is, bar none, the most challenging genre outside of comedy, because comedy is so purely subjective and it changes with such rapidity. But we'll tackle that when we get to a comedy game, maybe next week. For this week, we're doing horror with the Callisto Protocol. Let's see how it shaped up.
Now, but the critic scores, oh boy, I could talk to you all day about that.
It got 55 reviews, of 61% of critics recommended it on OpenCritic. It's got a 74 on Metacritic, a 76 on OC. The scores are in the range of 7 points, in the sense that the highest is a 10 and the lowest is a 3. Yeah, it's an interesting one to see come out, because, you know, a lot of critics felt it was neither end of the scale. Obviously, the 7 out of 10 is sort of meaningless at this point, but I don't want to have to keep saying this. All scores are meaningless. The text is what matters. Why don't we find out what the high scores text had to say? So we've returned to our regularly scheduled broadcast system of high scores, medium scores, unscored, and low scores in that order. I think it reflects the general consensus of these reviews. I don't think 61% is necessarily negative, but it isn't the extreme positivity that we saw in last week's video. So, yeah, I think this serves us a little bit better. With the high scores, we are going to tackle the 10 out of 10. And then we will use the random number generator to find our second high score. How many did we have? We went from anything 9 or above, and we rolled a 10, which gave us PCGamesN's 9 out of 10, which, 9 out of 10 gave us a 9 out of 10, eh? Pretty good. I like it. Still, the 10 came from Dexerto, which is how I'm told I am supposed to say it. Adrian Highton gave it a 10. Let's take a look at the pull quote from their review. A wonderfully exhausting exercise in futility is probably the best way of describing the Callisto Protocol, as no matter the strength of my own resolve, I was constantly on edge and reveling in those fleeting moments where the game allowed me to breathe following yet another life-threatening fight. The constant fear and dread incited by the phenomenal visual and sound design are only complemented by the compelling story. The Callisto Protocol is, hopefully, the start of an exciting new franchise, and is another sign that survival horror is anything but dead. That reads like a paragraph from a 10. I mean, it didn't start out that way. Exhausting evokes the sensation of negativity, but to successfully flip it around and explain that the exhaustion comes from the stress caused by this horror game, I think does a good job of making it seem like a fairly good horror game. So that's what you want. The death of the survival horror genre, I don't like that. I don't like that at all. it's one of those meaningless cliches that I think, the death is exaggerated. It's one of those situations where they're trying to find some way to wrap things up, and they've reached out and latched onto something that doesn't really mean anything at all. No, nobody thought the survival horror genre was dying. They just want to sort of carry on to their next point or wrap things up and get onto the score, and they want to do it in a thematically appropriate way. Death, survival horror, the links are there. It's just causally meaningless. Let's take a look at a paragraph from the review. The nauseating squelches and howls from enemies make a welcome change from the inordinate and a bit frustrating amount of time Jacob spends in crawl spaces and vents. But this is to be expected in major AAA games now to avoid loading screens. In my experience, I encountered next to no technical issues, outside of the odd frame drop. I reject the idea that a 10 out of 10 score or a 5 out of 5, as it is in this case, can't have criticism. I think you're absolutely allowed to give a game a perfect score. I'm using air quotes if you're just listening, and still make criticisms because there's no such thing as a perfect game. If we restrict the concept of a 10 to perfection, and perfection is unattainable, then we have created a system where the 10 is unattainable. And so we are basing our reviews on a 9-point scale, and then you go into the fact that nobody ever really, generally goes below a 5, and so we've got a 4-point scale, and Nevertheless, this review comes across as fairly negative in general. There's far more than just this paragraph that strikes me as negative, as a criticism, and I also reject the idea that crawling through vents is to be expected to avoid loading screens. We are in a wonderful world where the PCIe 4 technology is all but eliminating loading screens, and it is only due to games still coming out on previous gen hardware that we are being forced into situations where the pacing is killed by tedium, by way of slowed down, forced crawls to mask loading, and it's especially pointless when at this point everyone knows it's just masking loading. I personally would greatly prefer to put my control pad down and go do something else than to sit there and hold up on the thumbstick for the however long they decide I need to wait before the loading ends. I don't understand this obsession with avoiding loading screens at all costs. It doesn't make any sense to me. That said, I do think that this review, I don't think this review sells a 10, but I could see how Highton might have arrived there. From the bulk of the text, it does come across as though Highton really connected with the story, and the atmosphere and the visuals amplified that story in a way that made it really work for them. And I think personally, I am of the opinion that gameplay matters far more, but it is possible for someone to just become extremely attached to the characters, especially because of the medium of video games. That interactivity causes a link between the player and the player character that is really, that's the juice. That's what every video game wants to have happen. And clearly, I think despite their criticisms, based on Highton's review, they did connect with that player character deeply. And so, yeah, I don't know if it's a 5 out of 5. There's more criticisms than I would like in a 5 out of 5, but yeah, clearly those criticisms were greatly overwhelmed by the atmosphere, the story, and the sheer terror that Highton felt. Anyway, let's move on to PCGamesN's 9 out of 10. Nat Smith gave it 9 out of 10. Let's grab their paragraph. A spiritual successor to Dead Space that blends and riffs on ideas from the best horror games of recent years, with plenty of blood and guts to go around, though a lackluster plot is its one minor flaw. I think it's very interesting that Nat Smith found the plot to be lackluster when it was the high point for Andrew Highton from Dexerto. I don't know. Let's see if we can shake this out in the rest of their review. Calling the Callisto Protocol uninspired is incorrect. On the contrary, it wears its many inspirations boldly on its sleeve. Rather, the Callisto Protocol is a celebration of the best horror games of the previous generation, including Dead Space. It excels at what it sets out to do, which is deliver a rollicking good ride with plenty of scares along the way, and it takes clear pride in its heritage. During the game's denouement, a line of dialogue seems to address me directly. I do hope you have enjoyed your stay at Black Iron. I'm gratified to say that I have, and I'll certainly be making a return to the Callisto Protocol again in the future. I do not like the word denouement. Yeah, we get it, right? You got good words. Nobody cares. Let's move on, right? Just say the end. I did actually really like this review, though. I think the turn from saying, taking what could be read as uninspired and saying that it actually just, blatantly shows its inspirations. I think that's pretty clever. And the bulk of the review is filled with very clever turns on otherwise pretty simple criticisms. So I think Nat does a really good job with this review. It was a fun read, despite my disdain for denouement. I think it sort of sets the scene for how these reviews are going to go as well, because the line between homage, and ripoff is drawn different by every single person. And so, if Nat Smith felt that this was a satisfying homage, but that it wore its inspirations on its sleeve, then there's a very good chance that what we're going to see is people felt that it was more of a ripoff. That's my expectations, but let's find out. We're going to move on to the medium scores. Ranging from 60 all the way up to 89, we had 35 reviews to pick from for our medium scores, and we rolled up 16 and 28. Let's go look at 16. That would be GamingBible, Will McCue. They gave it an 8 out of 10. The Callisto Protocol is a lucid dream of a game. You want to escape the terrors flickering before you, but once the game gets hold with both tentacles, you're trapped in the hostile environment of the best horror game of the year. I don't want to tell Will how to live their life, but they need to improve their pre-sleep routine if this is what their lucid dreams looks like. They need to, just no more screens for half an hour before bed, no caffeine after 12, stop doing bath salts. Whatever it is they need to do. Bath salts. What a fresh reference. That's like 2012 reference. Do people still do bath salts? I don't know. I don't know. I thought Lucid Dream was a bit odd, but it's compelling. It's interesting. I'm intrigued to know more. Why don't we find out with a paragraph from their review? I played most of the game on the normal difficulty. However, for a few chapters, I turned the difficulty down as the constant deaths got to the point of frustration. Seeing the same unskippable death animation for the 10th time gets a bit much. Conversely, the easy mode is far too straightforward. I could just run and gun, which isn't what Callisto is about. Something in the middle would be perfect. On the higher difficulties, the GRP gravity device isn't just helpful, it's essential. There's also a maximum security difficulty for the maniacs out there who like to punish themselves. Difficulty, for me, is a really interesting and contentious point in game reviews. I firmly believe if you're playing a game for review, you should play through it on normal difficulty, and if you are unable to continue to do so, you need to flag it in the review, which is exactly what Will did. You don't necessarily need to change it down to easy, though. There have been situations where I felt the need to bump the difficulty up because I felt that I wasn't having any kind of interesting experience on the normal difficulty, and I needed the challenge of hard to change that. Obviously, should games be easier is a well-worn, well-trodden path that we won't go down here, but I do appreciate that that Will went out, explained that they changed the difficulty, and yeah, described their experience. It's also very interesting that playing on easy wasn't appropriate to them either. That it's especially like horror games are exactly the sort of games you need to be harder than most, right? Because you need that challenge to increase the stress. If the stress doesn't exist, then the horror doesn't exist outside of the atmosphere and perhaps some jump scares. I think this was actually a pretty good review. It was very high level. I get the feeling that GamingBible takes a high level approach to reviews, that they want, snappy entertainment that people can read pretty quickly on Facebook or something like that. That's how their business model works. But there were some hints at some deeper analysis throughout Will's review. I wish they could have been explored a bit more, but, horses for courses, I guess. Anyway, let's move on to the next review. Push Square gave it a 7 out of 10 with a review by Liam Croft. The Callisto Protocol is a consistently good game that, when it's at its best, gives many of the survival horror greats a run for their money. However, there's no getting around the fact that the game has very little to truly call its own. In borrowing so heavily from Dead Space, there's always a sense of having been there, done that. With frame rate issues and an unimaginative story with poor characters, the Callisto Protocol is good, but it's not great. This is exactly as I feared. The lower these scores get, the more they feel the Callisto Protocol is a rip-off than an homage. Let's see what else Liam has to say about this game. Although where the game returns to its roots is in its structure, it's almost completely linear. Save for a few optional areas and rooms off to the side, Striking Distance Studios has a single path for you to walk, and there's no deviating from it. In an age where 50-plus hour RPGs are a common part of the release schedule, it's refreshing to be told exactly where to go and not get distracted by side quests or open world activities. The old, I bet the golden ticket makes the chocolate taste terrible defense. I do not like it. The great thing about optional side content is that it's optional. You do not need to go and do it. So, yeah. I look, there are a million ways to actually maybe not a million, but there are a lot of ways to frame linearity as a positive if you think it is actually a positive. Like, I'm not saying that every game has to be open world or has to have branching whatevers. You can make a linear game and it can be great, but like saying that games are too open these days and I'm tired of it, it's just not the way to go about it, in my opinion. Like, you could talk about how it helps create structure, right? Or pacing, or hell, like just it helps streamline scares. It's like a horror game. If anything, a horror game has the best excuse to be linear as hell, because so much of a horror game relies on the player looking at the right thing at the right time and noticing the right thing when it occurs. And so if a player can go anywhere and do anything, the odds of them missing it are that much greater. So yeah, I think there are dozens of ways that you could that Liam could have framed this, and I'm annoyed that they went with this one. But that said, the rest of the review is actually pretty good. I got a lot out of it. They reinforce their position that Callisto Protocol spends far too much time retreading dead spaces, magnetically attachable ground. Yeah, they made most of their arguments really well, and what I found really interesting was they talked about like frame rate issues and performance issues, and they went into detail on the best way to play it. The Push Square is a PlayStation-focused site. They played on the PlayStation 5, and they go into detail about playing the game on performance mode to avoid stuttering, and how even on performance mode they couldn't avoid that stuttering because of the way, you know, the game's optimized. But at least when the game's trying to get to 60, the stuttering is more palatable. I just thought that was really, really interesting, and a lot of really good insight that I really appreciated. So I think, you know, I didn't like that one phrase, but I think otherwise Liam did a good job with this review. Yeah. I think it's time to move on to the unscored reviews. There were 5 unscored reviews in the unscored section, not counting those cowards who hadn't put a score on their reviews yet. We rolled 3. That gave us Kotaku, Ashley Bardhan. I consider the Callisto Protocol one of the most ambitious games I played this year, maybe even the most, next to Elden Ring. Though I think Elden Ring is in a league of its own, I don't know if anything will be able to approach its depth and sophistication for a long time. Its thoughtful attention to environment, sound, and touch is what I think next-gen gaming should be like. An experiment with the senses and with story. The game has its issues too, which can't be ignored, but at least it feels human. It's weird to read about the Callisto Protocol being ambitious when even the, you know, medium positive reviews described it as, you know, at best an homage to a 15-year-old game. But I think obviously that ambition is coming from the visual aspect. I am very intrigued to find out how a game can feel human. I don't get that from this paragraph specifically, so hopefully it will be threaded through the rest of the review. Let's see if we can find out. When you confront an enemy, you are expected to dodge their attacks by holding your left stick in the opposite direction of their swing, or down if you're blocking it. The game tells you there is no timing window, just get it done, but I dodge so many times and get yet another long, unskippable death animation. Jacob's skull getting stamped on and turned into an ocean spray of blood. Jacob's eyes getting gouged out by fat zombie thumbs. Jacob's nose turning concave from all the fat zombie hits to the face. To know that this can't be true. this was actually a really good review. I really enjoyed it. It was very evocative in the language it used to describe what happened in the Callisto Protocol, and it painted a really good picture of how Ashley came to the conclusion that it was ambitious. Even if I, still don't necessarily agree, I can see how they arrived there, and I think that's really good. The human thing was sort of related, I think, to a plot point within the Callisto Protocol itself. I think they were going for like a trying to become more than human. Humans are fallible type thing, and so Ashley is trying to say that the Callisto Protocol is fallible, but at least it is what it is. Something like that. I don't know if they landed it, but it was a good try, and yeah, overall this might be my favorite review of the bunch. I just think they did a really good job of writing something that I enjoyed reading all the way through. Yeah, the dodging sounds super frustrating, and they're not the first ones to mention it. They're also not the first ones to mention the unskippable death animations. That sounds like it could be cause for a lot of frustration, and yeah, especially if you keep dying over and over again, that would probably add up over time, Anyway, good review. Let's check out the low scores. Just as we had an outlier in the high scores, we had one in the low scores as well. Jim Stephanie Sterling gave the game a 3 out of 10. We are obviously going to tackle that. So for the other scores, we went anything below a 6. That gave us 6 to choose from. We rolled a 6, which is Xbox error, a 5.9 out of 10. And it was by Jesse Norris. The Callisto Protocol is a gorgeous mess. I cannot recommend it at the full launch price. The combat is miserable and the story is simply not interesting. If you're a massive fan of survival horror, it lets you down by not being scary either. Instead, relying on jump scares the entire time. It is highly competent technically though, and I hope the team at Striking Distance gets more time for their next title, which very well could be a sequel to this one. Even some of the positive reviews said the game wasn't terribly scary, which definitely isn't a good thing. It's interesting to hear Jesse talk about the game being a highly competent technically, when, again, even some of the more positive reviews called it out for dropping frames all over the place, and it's getting slammed on Steam at the moment for not doing very well at texture streaming. So yeah, that's an interesting tack to take, but that's the one of the trickiest things in video game reviews is when you don't have any problems and then you go out there and everyone else appears to have, and you just have that one version, that one PC build that is perfect for this game, and everything, all the stars align, and you had no problems at all. Everyone's like, oh my god, this game's broken as hell. And the reverse also happens, where your copy is the only one that's balked somehow, and you're going out there like, did it not crash over and over for you? Oh, like, what's going on here? Anyway, tricky, right? So you can't really hold that against Jesse. What I did think was really odd was the idea that Striking Distance needs more time for the next title. They're an independent studio, or they're owned by Crofton, I believe, and there was no real time pressure on them to get this game out. So theoretically, they had as much time as they needed. They just crunched their way to get it out now. Odd way to end it. Let's take a look at a paragraph from the review. I talked a lot about upgrades. It's a basic system that works on an in-game currency found in enemy drops, which you get by stomping their body with the Y button, Dead Space style. or through selling valuable items you pick up in the environment. The currency is hilariously called Callisto credits. I don't know why it made me laugh so hard, but the 3D printers that dot the levels requiring this Dead Moon only currency cracked me up. There's a lot of video game suspension of disbelief required here, and it's paired with an unbelievably serious and dour story. Once you have upgraded items like your gravity glove and acquire the suit shown in all the promotional material, the game's combat goes from being bad to almost okay. Your inventory size will double and you'll take noticeably less damage per hit, but this doesn't happen until halfway through the story. You can like feel the disdain that Jesse has for this game. Is like, it's visceral, right? Like, they do not like this game. And so what they've done is they've written a very clinical review, a very technically accurate review. Sort of, it reads kind of dull, except for when they then talk about how the game made them feel, because they had a bad experience with it. The otherwise very bland writing amplifies those criticisms in a way that is very entertaining. And this is a trick you can use when you're writing a review to make sure you stay respectful, right? Being very technical in your writing is a great way to communicate in a manner that can't be sort of questioned for being overly emotive. It's one of those things you see, like when you want to write a professional FU email, right? What you don't write, how dare you ask me to move my deadline up by a full week without any offer of compensation, you cheap melon farmer, right? You don't write anything like that. You say, I'm afraid we are going to have trouble meeting a new deadline without extra compensation. However, we can discuss new terms at your earliest convenience, and I will do my best to chase this new deadline. You say stuff like that, right? And the boot is still in there, and you get your point across that what's happening is not acceptable. But you don't come across as unprofessional. It's a good trick. I don't think this review read like a 5.9, but it read lower than a 5 to me. Jesse hated this game. It's an entertaining review, specifically once you realize what they're trying to do is stay as respectful as possible. It's good for that. I'd recommend checking this one out. Our last review is the Jimquisition. Jim Stephanie Sterling gave us a 3 out of 10, which, is by far the lowest score. It's the lowest score we've had on reviews in review, which is cool. Let's take a look at a paragraph from it. The Callisto Protocol isn't scary. It isn't fun. It isn't entertaining, fascinating, or mildly enriching. It lays a self-entitled claim to Dead Space's stylistic and mechanical elements, yet wields not a single one with grace, instead performing a crude pantomime. It's mechanically unpleasant, bereft of a single original idea, and hostile to its own players. There's literally one jump scare tactic reused at a rate best described as pathological. It's got some damn nerve wanting to be seen as a worthy successor. It can't even rival the weakest of pretenders. All right, well, this is the end state of the path we were taking from homage to ripoff. This is full ripoff, and they are offended by the concept of having to play a full budget ripoff. Yeah, Sterling clearly did not like the Callisto Protocol. Compared to this, it feels like Jesse from Xbox era was almost a champion of the Callisto Protocol. Let's see how it pans out in the full review. While not the buggiest game I've ever played, polish is certainly needed, and it's reportedly unplayable on PC. I've had items glitch through the floor, and one particularly insulting bug caused the camera to fix in position thanks to a bloody QTE ambush disabling its movement. Bitterly laughing at how I could no longer aim as a result of the game's most antagonistically dreadful feature is genuinely the only time I could crack a smile while playing. The rest of my experience was spent feeling quite sincerely miserable. I felt miserable playing the Callisto Protocol. It can feel insulting when you're playing a game and things don't work as they're supposed to. And it can stack up over, like, all the little things can stack up and make the experience worse and worse and worse. And you start to, once the glass is shattered, right, you can't really get it back in the bottle, right? It's difficult to get it back in the bottle, and it takes a lot of effort to do that. Clearly, Sterling has gone in a different direction than trying to get it back in the bottle. Yeah. I think... I don't know. I don't think Sterling... Well, it's tricky to say, right? Sterling says... Some of the stuff that Sterling complains about in this review is just way over the top. They hate the game so much they complain about the name of the prison. If you want a hint as to the kind of creativity we're dealing with, the prison is called Black Iron. They may as well have just called it the Bad Prison Place. They write. Black Iron, is it that bad a name? Right? Like, aren't prisons usually called something bad? Like, the options, like, there's Blackgate in Batman, right? Or Arkham Asylum, right? Those seem pretty bad. I don't know. Does Batman get ripped? The alternative would be Callisto Correctional Center, or the Triple C, or something like that. I don't know. That seems like there's a really tricky balancing act to be done when you're writing an extremely negative review. Because it's very easy to come across as just a hater, right? I often compensate for this by over-explaining the positives or over-explaining, my adoration, or where my adoration disappeared, right? Over-explaining that, I was really enjoying this and then something happened. Sterling, if you're not familiar, has made a career out of sort of, doing the overblown, over-exaggerated, vitriolic like criticism of a wide range of things, usually the business practices of games companies. And I think, they've made some exceptional videos in the past, like holding publishers to account for their scummier practices. But this review, this comes across as like just pure uncut haterade, really. Like, yeah, obviously they didn't like it. But I don't know. Compared to Jesse Norris's professional FU, this comes across as the I'm never coming back to the office, right? I'm never coming back to this office. F you, F everyone in it. F you, you're good. F you. Yeah, I just think, I don't know. But then again, Sterling, as I said, has made a career out of doing this kind of thing. And, you can't ask the dog to do its one trick and then get mad when it does it, right? That doesn't make any sense. So anyway, I think it could be easy to, take this review at face value. If you weren't aware of Sterling's shtick, yeah, you might read this and just be like, wow. Crikey. But yeah, if you know how they act in general, then yeah, I guess you can glean some information from this. But a lot of it just comes across as they were very annoyed by some of the things this game did, and they let that annoyance flow. It's a lot of fun to write a really negative review, just as it's a lot of fun to write the extremely unprofessional FU email, But usually you delete it and then go back and do something, that won't get you fired. Obviously, Sterling doesn't have to worry about being fired from the Jimquisition, seeing how it's their site. So more power to them. Anyway, let's jump over to the conclusion. The Callisto Protocol faces a pretty tricky situation. It asks the question, do you remember Dead Space? And then it seems like it really hopes that you don't. Right? That's the essence of these reviews. Is the more you remember Dead Space, the more you'll feel the Callisto Protocol ripped it off. Is what it seems like. Although it's very possible that our highest scored review from Dexerto may have remembered it better than most, and that's why they felt that it was as much of an homage as they felt. Same with the PCGamesN review. Those two really high ones, they may actually really remember Dead Space. So maybe it's like a curve, right? And if you sit somewhere low on the curve, then you're going to feel like it's a rip-off. And if you sit on either end, you don't remember it or you do remember it well, then you're gonna feel better about the Callisto Protocol. The real problem, though, that the Callisto Protocol has is if you want to play a game that seems a lot like Dead Space, theoretically, you can just wait a couple of months for the Dead Space remake that's coming out, right? And that's a tricky one to tackle for Striking Distance Studios. I don't know what they're supposed to do about that, right? Especially with the initial poor reception this game got. I didn't much agree with everything said in the 3 out of 10 review, but I'm glad we got a score of 3 out of 10. I think the Xbox Error review read closer to that score than it did a 6. I would love to see more scores drag their way below the 5 to readjust the overall balance of scores. But it is what it is. I think it's really cool that this game had such a broad range of opinions. We need more wildly diverse opinions on video games at the end of the day. Yeah. So from a reviews perspective, I think it brought out some really interesting stuff. As for the game itself, I think you need to ask yourself, do you want to wait a couple of months to play Dead Space, the remake? Or do you want to play a game that seems to be kind of a lot like Dead Space, albeit one with a lot of jump scares and maybe some performance issues? Who knows? It's entirely on you. Anyway, thanks for watching. I don't know, like, subscribe if you're enjoying these videos. Make sure you read all of the reviews. The links are in the description below. Check out the GAPodcast for more from me and my co-host Luke. And yeah, we're running out of games for this year. So we'll see what we've got next week. We might do High on Life. I don't know how big a reception it's going to get. I haven't seen any details on its embargo yet, so I'm not sure how the timing will work out. Otherwise, we're going to try and do... I'm going to review my own reviews. So that'll be interesting, because obviously I am arrogant as hell. So they're all going to be bangers, I assume. I only write bangers. But we'll see when we get to them. Anyway, that's all I got. Thanks for watching. Stay safe. Love you. Bye.